With the general election 69 days away, campaigns are very curious about the state of mind of the American voter. So are we. To help us out, we are turning to some trusted Republican pollsters. Jim McLaughlin is the Trump campaign pollster with McLaughlin and Associates. Ashley Rich Stevenson is Vice President and National Political Director of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And Chris Wilson is partner at WPA Intelligence. Thank you for joining us today. I want to start with you, Jim, as far as polling. We have seen that polling in 2016, Hillary Clinton was up, and then President Trump won. We are seeing polling now that Joe Biden is up. What are you seeing internally compared to public polls? Is there a big difference? Because we've heard from some Republicans, they don't believe the polls that are out there right now.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question, Bob, because, we were crazy enough back in 2016 to say President Trump was going to win. And that was based off our polls, because a lot of these national polls you see, they're just not accurate and they don't matter in the presidential race. What really matters is what's going on in the Electoral College. Places like, Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, et cetera. There's literally 17 states that we're looking. And the race is looking really good in those states right now. We're actually seeing a nice little bump right now. Joe Biden got no bump. It was interesting. Somebody was asking me about a CBS poll that was recently done. Well, Joe Biden had the double-digit lead, but the reason he had the double-digit lead was because party registration or party affiliation on the survey was plus 12 Democrat. That's just not reality. That's not what's going to happen on Election Day. We haven't had an election in this country in decades where Republicans haven't been at least about a third of the electorate right now. So we feel really good about where things stand right now, especially, and Congressman Dunn, who we work with, who is just a great American, he said it right. When you look at the issues, and we've seen this all along, when you look at the issues that really matter most to the American public right now, they're really on the side of the Republican Party. The last thing they want to do is a $4 trillion tax increase from Joe Biden. The last thing they want to do is government-run health care. And the last thing they want is to defund the.
Ashley, I want to talk about the U.S. Chamber's relationship with President Trump. You've differed on some issues on trade, but agree with him on anti-regulatory efforts. Going forward, what are you looking for President Trump to say to the business community? And as far as the agenda for this year and going forward, I know employer liability is a big issue. What does the Chamber want Congress to do?
Sure. First and foremost, the U.S. Chamber does not get engaged in presidential politics. We are solely focused on federal races like the U.S. Senate, races for House. But you said it best. We are really focused on liability protections, particularly in what could be next in a Phase 4 package. 6 out of 10 Americans want some kind of liability protection, grows to 80% when we start to talk about small businesses that are essential and have stayed open through the pandemic. Pharmacies, grocery stores, places like that. That's an absolutely huge priority for the business community and something that we hope to see taken care of here soon.
Just a quick follow-up on that. How does the Chamber decide who they're going to endorse? Mostly the Chamber endorses Republicans, and you can say, well, they're more pro-business than Democrats, but you have endorsed Democrats like Henry Cuellar. What's the process for how you endorse? And second part of that question, will you and have you endorsed any Senate Democratic candidates?
So the U.S. Chamber's endorsement process is primarily driven by our annual scorecard. It comes out once a year to look back on the previous Congress, the kind of votes they've taken on issues that are of critical importance to the business community. So far, we've endorsed all Senate Republicans up for re-election this year. I don't know if we'll endorse any Democrats, but we also have supported a number of House Democrats like Congressman Cuellar, who's been a very active vocal supporter for the business community, and look forward to growing those relationships. A huge priority for the Chamber is to rebuild the governing center in the House, and that's something we continue to make good on.
Chris, I want to talk about Joe Biden and his strengths and weaknesses. Some Republicans we've talked to privately have been frustrated that the White House and the Trump campaign has not been able to successfully label him. But he does have some weaknesses like any other candidates. I mean, President Trump is still up on the economy. And as far as enthusiasm, President Trump enjoys an advantage. What's your kind of analysis of the race right now?
Well, I think Jimmy was right in the way that he referenced the fact that this is really being decided in just a set number of states. And if you look at what has occurred in those states over the course of the last couple of weeks, you've seen the president's numbers steadily improve, and I think you'll continue to see that. And in fact, I think as you see riots continue to increase, like what's happening in Wisconsin, I think what's going on right now is going to almost be a lock in the fact that President Trump will win Wisconsin again. But there's really a few core issues that I see that are going to drive this election. I mean, obviously, COVID is going to be first and foremost until a cure is found or if we reach herd immunity. But the other ones, there's really 6 key issues that I see that are going to drive it. And fortunately, the president leads on all of them. You've got the economy, which is going to be a dominant issue, continue to be a dominant issue, where President Trump leads on that 49 to 40%. You have foreign policy, where the president leads 44 to 42. You have the federal budget deficit, and the president leads 42 to 39. You have law enforcement, and the president leads 46 to 42. And I think you'll see that continue to increase. And then finally, you have terrorism, where the president leads 46 to 37. So it is, if there is a definition of Joe Biden, it's not strong in any of those key areas. And I think because of that, you've got to look at this from an issue standpoint and think that it bodes well for the president right now.
Jim, as far as the states compared to 2016, I know you're not going to reveal any kind of strategy, but how do you see the state of play? I mean, Minnesota was very close the last time, and there was a recent poll showing it's a dead heat. Hillary, I think, won it by 1.5 points last time. But what's the difference? Is there much of a difference between the battlegrounds in 2016 and now 2020?
There's always a little bit of a difference because every race, it's kind of like some people have told us, Texas is going to be in play and Ohio. I'm telling you right now, Donald Trump is going to win those states. It's really interesting. Remember last time when we were looking at the states, there was the so-called blue wall. It was Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And I remember getting a survey back, only days before Election Day, that literally had us tied. When I say tied, I mean to the percentage points in Pennsylvania. And that's basically what happened on Election Day. In a place like Pennsylvania, believe it or not, the numbers right now are significantly better for President Trump than they were 4 years ago. One of the big reasons for it is you had Joe Biden say he's going to get rid of the fossil fuel industry. He's basically going to abolish us being energy independent. And literally, you have a state like Pennsylvania that relies on tens of millions, at least millions of jobs that come out of that industry, out of Pennsylvania. And that's not just going to sell in those working class places. That's not going to sell in Michigan, where the auto industry still has a big footprint, let alone there was a survey. I'm going to point to 2 surveys that recently just came out. One came out yesterday in Wisconsin, had President Trump ahead. And this is literally right after when Joe Biden should be getting the bump. And you had another survey that came out, I believe it was today. John Zogby came out with a survey where President Trump's job approval rating is at 52%. And oh, by the way, 4 years ago, Barack Obama, when he was running for re-election, his was only at about 47% right now. So we feel really good about where things are right now. And we always knew that the real race was going to start to get defined right after the convention.
Ashley, going back to the battle for Congress and, how Congress works or doesn't work. I used to cover health care, and Congress in 1997 passed a Balanced Budget Act that was widely bipartisan. But now, in recent years, Obamacare passes without any Republican votes. Laws are slammed home. The Trump taxes pass without any Democratic votes. How can, it used to be that we'd have elections and then everyone would say, okay, now we need to work for the American people. And it seems like the campaign starts the day after the election. How can Congress get back to work again where it actually is striking bipartisan deals?
There's no greater example than the passage of the USMCA late last year, early in this year, where members from both parties, both sides of the aisle, came together in the Senate and the House and were able to get a deal done. we're very hopeful to see something similar on infrastructure looking ahead, and really do believe that there are plenty of opportunities moving forward. Again, back to phase 4, where we're hopeful that we will be able to see a bipartisan deal, of course, that covers liability protections moving forward. So while things certainly are very partisan, as is natural, heading into the final stretches of the election, Congress does need to be able to come together and get something done moving ahead related to phase 4 legislation.
Chris, the battle for the Senate, it's going to be very close. Basically, Democrats need at least 3 seats if they do win the presidency, and probably, they're going to have to win 4. Doug Jones in Alabama is looking like he is certainly the underdog in that red state in a presidential election. Where do you see the race for the Senate, and what states are you watching that you think will make the difference?
Well, I think you're right. Alabama is almost a certain loss for the Democrats. Tommy Tuberville has proven to be a very strong candidate and nominee there, and it's going to be interesting to see a college football coach in Congress. First one, I think, since Tom Osborne, so I'm excited about that as a big college football fan. But I think looking at the other races that are close, I mean, you've got the challenge that I think Republicans have this year is sort of the same challenge the Democrats had last year, and that all the competitive seats tend to be on our side. You've got Arizona, where Martha McSally's running. It was appointed to the open seat and now is running for re-election. And Democrats are dumping a lot of money into that race. It reminds me of a couple of years ago when I was working for Senator Cruz, and you had Beto O'Rourke, who was able to raise and spend $90 million, more than anyone had ever raised and spent in a U.S. Senate race before. And I think you could see Arizona approaching those types of levels. But I think if you look at other races, I really feel good about Republicans' chances. I'll go to Colorado, where Jimmy pointed out the fact that the Biden campaign and Joe Biden has taken a stance on wanting to eliminate fossil fuels, and that is a dominant industry in Colorado. If that goes away, then you're going to have hundreds of thousands of people out of work there. And I think Cory Gardner is doing an excellent job taking advantage of that. He's an indefatigable campaigner. And you've got John Hickenlooper, I think, has turned out to be a much weaker candidate for Senate than anybody thought he was going to be. And then from there, I think you look at North Carolina, where Tom Tillis is up for re-election. Again, he won a kind of a surprising race 6 years ago. It shows that he can run a good campaign. And I'll give you one more important statistic. If you look at senators running for re-election in the same year as the president, 90% of those when the president wins their state wins re-election. Well, I think the president's going to win North Carolina. I think that's going to help Tom Tillis out a lot. Then the other flip side of that is when the president loses their state, still 70% of incumbents are re-elected. So you look up to Maine, which is another competitive race. I think Susan Collins she had a bit of a dip at the beginning of COVID, but you look at the Real Clear Politics average, and she's now recovered there, and I think it's got to be a favorite for re-election. You've got Montana, where Democrats thought they had another great recruitment. They got Governor Bullock to drop out of the race for president. Sorry, just like they did Hickenlooper in Colorado. He started out strong, but it started to really simmer out. And I think you've got Steve Daines, who's probably going to win that by, if not double digits, close to double digits. And then Iowa, where I think a lot of people thought Joni Ernst might be in trouble. I know Ashley worked for her in her first election and helped her get across the line. She was a surprising win then. Well, the president's very strong in Iowa, and I think, again, that's where you look at that 90% figure. Even if Ernst was stumbling, and I don't think she is, I think she is going to. I think she's a strong bet for re-election. She's still, just because the president's going to do so well there, that's going to be a strength for her.
Mm-hmm. Jim, talking about President Trump and the media, he obviously has had a contentious relationship with the press, but at the same time, he's very accessible. I've interviewed him 4 times. The first time at Trump Tower, his campaign promised us 15 minutes, and we got 80. After she lost, Hillary Clinton said she was too careful. She didn't do a lot of media interviews. We're not seeing Joe Biden do a lot of media interviews, and we have a story on thehill.com. Democrats are a little concerned that he's staying in his basement. Does that work to your advantage if he doesn't do a lot of media interviews / travel?
Literally, it's amazing because the basement, the Biden basement strategy, it's clearly catching up to him. And you know what? Forget the reporters about being nice to the press and all the other kind of stuff. It's an insult to the American people. The American people, literally, they want to see you, they want to touch you, they want to feel you, all that other kind of good stuff. There is no reason, even if he wanted to stay in his basement, there is no reason why he's not talking to multiple reporters every day. And your point too, Bob, and you're exactly right. We have never seen a president be more open, more accessible, more transparent with the media than we have seen with President Trump. Literally every single day he takes questions. And you know what? Now we're seeing, especially among swing voters, they're giving him a lot of credit for that because he's out there every day fighting for them. And these stories that we're hearing at the convention right now, and I think the ones that have been most impactful aren't the ones necessarily from the politicians, even though there have been some great, great speeches from the convention, from the politicians. It's from real Americans. And I think that's always something the media has never really understood with this president, the connection that he has in middle America, especially in those battleground states that matter most in the presidential election.
Ashley, I want to talk about the impact of COVID-19. I'm sure you've talked to a lot of business owners who've been significantly hurt. What is the mood of businesses across the country right now, because this has just been so devastating to them?
It's clear that if there wasn't the CARES Act that was bipartisan and then, of course, PPP, many of these business owners, small and large, would be in a much more devastating place. And it's those senators, many of which were already mentioned, who've delivered on this bipartisan legislation, and particularly PPP, Senator Susan Collins being a great example, that has given so much confidence to the business community to believe that there's a path forward. There are movements now for perhaps another round of PPP funding, a second plan that looks similar to that. And the business community is very supportive, again, of a continuing path forward to get us through this pandemic, to continue to allow for a growth in consumer confidence, and frankly, just get us back to normal.
You mentioned Susan Collins, who is in a tough race in Maine. And we went through your endorsement process. Will there be a lot of funds, money behind the people you've endorsed?
Well, we run a separate issue advocacy campaign, basically, to talk about issues that matter. Our focus from the Chamber perspective this year has been to communicate with constituents who are supportive of the business community. We basically call them Chamber constituents. And a lot of the messaging that we've been delivering, for example, in Maine, has been about Senator Collins delivering for PPP, encouraging her to keep fighting for infrastructure jobs. That's a great example. Another one out in Colorado, Senator Gardner's work on tech apprenticeships, the new economy, a new economy forward that's likely to take place at even greater speed as a result of the pandemic. So we've been very, very focused on our issue advocacy campaigns that communicate with those suburban constituents, focused on these economic issues that are even more important now in light of coronavirus.
Chris, I want to ask you about just kind of sleeper issues, maybe the issues that are not being discussed in the media. We talked about certainly the protesters, and that's on the news, or at least it's on some cable stations on a regular basis, but not all. But what do you think are some of the sleeper policy issues that really will have an impact on November 3rd?
Well, you know, the one that we've addressed a few times here that I think is really underreported on is energy. I think the Green New Deal and the Biden campaign's embracing of that is that's a big issue in a lot of swing states. And Colorado isn't considered a swing state, frankly, but if you look at the impact of the energy industry, the oil and gas industry to Colorado, it is substantial. There are other states where you see that same footprint. New Mexico, which again is not one that is probably even one of the 17 that Jimmy mentioned. But having said that, if you have the Democrats really embracing and getting around the Green New Deal, the impact that would have on the New Mexico economy would be almost equivalent to another COVID shutdown. And so those are the stories. I do think that has the ability to rise to the top, whereas no one's talking about energy being a major issue right now. But because the way the Democrats have embraced it and the way that they've moved so far to the extremist left on it, that you could see it entering into Senate races and the presidential race in a way that is pretty important. And, the other ones that I would say are what I addressed earlier. I mean, I think if you look at, it'd be impossible to call the economy a sleeper issue, but the Democrats don't want to talk about the economy because they make this about the issues that they lead on, which, I mean, let's face it, for a long time, Democrats have led on the healthcare issue. They've done a good job of misleading the American people on issues like pre-existing conditions. And so because of that, they're able to make that a dominant issue for them. But because of the economic shutdown and because of the impacts of the COVID COVID-19, I think you're seeing, and we asked the question in our surveys, what is the coronavirus or COVID-19, is it more of an economic issue or is it more of a healthcare issue? And initially, it was obviously more of a healthcare issue, but we've started to see over the last several weeks that a majority of voters say it's more of an economic issue. And I think as that moves more into the forefront, you're going to see Democrats begin to be concerned about that. And who knows, maybe it even gets Joe Biden out of his basement. I was doing a panel this weekend, and we were discussing the fact that Biden made the comment that if he was advised to, he'd shut everything down. And one of my fellow panelists said, well, nobody wants to shut everything down. And I disagreed. I said the people who do are the Biden campaign team, because they don't want him getting out of his basement, because every time he does, he's going to make comments like that. They're going to put the race more in jeopardy.
We have run out of time. I want to thank you all for joining us this morning. Great panel discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.